My best friend of 12 years got my wife pregnant. And my parents, my sister and my aunt all knew before I did. They held conversations in my kitchen. They used my dining room table to make decisions about my marriage and my future. They chose words carefully. They assigned me a role. The understanding husband, the steady son, the one who would hold the family together, without once asking if I wanted it. So I gave them the only honest response I had left. I disappeared. No speech, no final confrontation, no courtroom drama. I removed myself so completely and so quietly that by the time they understood what was happening, there was nothing left to reach. I was 33 years old, a structural engineer working infrastructure contracts across Alberta. Mostly oil sands projects up in Fort McMurray. The kind of work that keeps the lights on in half the country but never gets named. Bridges, facility expansions, pipeline crossings. Work that required you to be careful, to check your assumptions twice, to stay functional under pressure for weeks at a stretch. My supervisor used the word steady when he talked about me. I didn't know how much I'd end up needing that to be true. My wife, I'll call her Meredith, was a pediatric nurse at the Alberta Children's Hospital in Calgary. She had real warmth, the kind that made parents trust her within minutes of meeting her. She remembered every child's name, every family's circumstances, every small detail that made people feel cared for. I thought that was who she was. Later I understood she was simply excellent at managing how people felt about her. My best friend Angus had been in my life since our first year at the University of Calgary. Residence, study sessions, 3 winters coaching the same intramural hockey team. He was funny and unreliable. And genuinely likable in the way that lets certain people coast through life, on goodwill they never quite replenish. He owned a small gym in the northwest end of the city. Not a franchise, his own place, perpetually struggling. I had helped him with the equipment lease 3 years earlier. $10,000. He said he'd pay it back. He never did, and eventually I let it go. He was my best friend. That was what I had convinced myself mattered more than the pattern. The night everything changed, I had been in Fort McMurray for 3 weeks on a facility expansion project. The crew discovered reverse spacing errors in a foundation pour, caught late, serious enough to halt the entire phase while the drawings went back for review. My supervisor sent everyone home. I was on the highway south by noon. I didn't call Meredith. I wanted to surprise her. We'd been married 4 years, together for 7. And she'd mentioned twice that she missed the version of me who used to do that. Show up unannounced, no announcement, just home. I considered stopping for flowers outside Red Deer. It was getting late. I kept driving. I turned onto our street, a little before 11 at night. Angus's truck was in my driveway. I drove past without stopping. Meredith's car was there, his truck directly behind it. The house was mostly dark, 1 lamp lit in the front room. I turned at the end of the block, parked 3 houses down across the street, and cut the engine. Then I sat there and let my brain do what brains do in those moments, build the defense case. His heat was out. He'd been drinking. And she'd taken his keys. There were 100 explanations. And I cycled through every single one of them over 2.5 hours. At 1:15 in the morning, my front door opened. Angus came out first. Then Meredith appeared in the doorway behind him, wearing the hoodie I'd brought back from a Flames game 7 years ago. Her legs were bare. The porch light was off, but the street light gave me enough. I watched him pause at the bottom of the steps and turn back. I watched her come down to meet him. They kissed. Not a quick thing. Not something ambiguous. Slow and easy and familiar. The kiss of 2 people who had done this many times before and expected to do it again. He got in his truck. She stood on the front step with her arms wrapped around herself against the October cold, and watched him drive away. Then she went back inside my house. I had laid those front porch stones myself. The summer after we bought the place, I had dug out the old crumbling concrete, re-leveled the base, and mortared every piece into place over 3 weekends. Meredith had brought me cold water and told me I was going to hurt my back, and I'd laughed and she'd kissed my neck. We'd sat on those same steps together for 4 years of evenings. I stayed in the truck until the sun came up. I didn't go inside. I didn't call anyone. Something in me had gone very quiet. The way a job site goes quiet after a serious incident. Everyone still, no one speaking, just the ringing where the noise used to be. By the time it was light, I understood one thing. If I went in there now, they would get a scene. They would get tears and excuses, and the chance to shape the moment. I didn't want to give them a moment. I wanted to know everything first. I drove to a hotel on MacLeod Trail and checked in for a week. The next morning, I went home. Meredith was in the kitchen making coffee. When I came through the door, she startled. Then her face opened into what looked exactly like happiness. I had always thought I knew what her happiness looked like. "You're home early," she said. "Wrapped up ahead of schedule," I said. She came over and hugged me, and I hugged her back, and kissed the top of her head. She smelled like her shampoo. The same brand she'd used for years. She said she'd missed me. I said I'd missed her too. That was the first deliberate lie I'd told in a marriage that had apparently been full of them on her end. That I was going to need to get comfortable with it for a while longer. For the next 6 days, I was the husband she thought I still was. I came home for dinner. I asked about her shifts at the hospital. I watched television beside her on the couch. I fixed the broken towel bar in the upstairs bathroom that she'd mentioned needing to be done, which apparently Angus had never gotten around to during all his time being helpful. I noted that detail. While she thought I was at work, I was building a case file. Bank records first. Interac e-transfers to Angus's account. $180 here, $250 there, scattered across 6 months. I'd seen 2 of them before, and she'd explained them away without my even asking. Groceries he'd picked up. A ride to an appointment when her car was in the shop. Those explanations had seemed reasonable in isolation. Looking at all of them in sequence, with dates lined up against my work rotation schedule, nothing fit the way she'd said it did. Her phone was the next thing. She'd left it on the bathroom counter while she showered. Her passcode was our anniversary. I don't know what it means that she hadn't even changed it. Maybe she'd stopped thinking about it. Maybe she just hadn't gotten around to it. The messages went back 5 months. 5 months of scheduling around my rotations. 5 months of near misses they apparently thought were funny. 5 months of Angus asking when I was heading back north. And Meredith, she hated the place feeling empty when I was gone. There were things in those messages I would have paid real money to be able to not have seen. I didn't delete any of it. I took screenshots of everything, documented it the same way I would document a project discrepancy. Dates, times, amounts, context. Then I found the pregnancy test in the bathroom trash, tucked under tissues and makeup wipes like guilt. Was something you could cover with cotton. Positive. She hadn't said a word to me, but 3 days earlier she had sent Angus a photo of it. His response, "Holy crap, is it mine?" Her answer, "I think so." He's barely been home. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed that night and stared at the wall for a long time. Barely been home. As though my absence were a personal failing. Instead of the reason our mortgage got paid on time. As though the work I was doing, the work that kept the whole structure of our life upright, had made me responsible for what they'd done. I added the pregnancy test to the file. Then I went back to playing husband for another week. The full weight of it landed at Thanksgiving. My parents lived up in Airdrie, 40 minutes north of the city. Thanksgiving at their place had been a fixed point my whole life. My father, certain that he alone knew how to properly roast a turkey. My mother reorganizing his kitchen around him while pretending she wasn't. My sister helping with the pies with it. My aunt arriving late with a bottle of Niagara Red and opinions about everything. It was the kind of gathering that felt permanent. The kind you assume will always be exactly this. Meredith and I drove out together. Angus was not there, which, in hindsight, told me something about how carefully the guest list had been managed. Over dinner, I mentioned that my supervisor had been asking about extending my Fort McMurray contract another 4 months. Good money. Good timing for the project. My mother's face changed. Not disappointment. Not a wife's worry about her son being away too long. Something sharper. Something that looked like controlled panic. "That seems like a lot," she said carefully. "You've been away so much already." Meredith kept her eyes on her plate. My sister glanced at my aunt across the table. My aunt looked somewhere past my left shoulder. My father set his fork down very deliberately and said, "Meredith, would you mind checking on the pies?" She left without a word. My father said, "Come, give me a hand with something." We went into the kitchen. My mother followed. My aunt came in behind her and pulled the door most of the way closed. And I stood in my parents' kitchen at 33 years old, in the middle of a conversation I had apparently not been invited to. Except that now I was standing inside it. My father cleared his throat. "Son, there's something we've been meaning to discuss with you." I said nothing. "So?" My mother folded her hands in front of her. She had a particular way of holding herself when she needed to deliver something difficult. Composed, gentle, the language already pre-chosen. "We know how hard you've been working," she started. "And we are proud of you. We really are." My aunt added, "When a woman is on her own a lot, things can get complicated." "How long have you known?" I said. Silence. My father looked at the floor. "Angus and Meredith," I said. "How long have you known?" No one answered fast enough. "Months," my father said finally. My mother reached for my hand. "They ended it. She wants to make this work. And there's a pregnancy. And that baby is still going to be connected to this family no matter what. We need to approach this together. As a family." I looked at her. "When is she due?" More exchanged glances. "April," she said. "There's a chance, they don't know yet. There's a chance it might be Angus's." But that doesn't change the fact that the kitchen door swung open. My grandmother came in from the back hallway, carrying an empty serving dish, looked at the four of us standing there in silence and said, in exactly the tone she used to announce, dinner was on the table. Oh good. You told him. Nobody moved. She set the dish on the counter, touched my arm, and said that these things happen in families. And the important thing was that now we all knew and could handle it properly. Then she went back out to the dining room. That was the moment. Not the porch, not the pregnancy test. That was the moment I understood what had actually happened, not just between Meredith and Angus, but between me and every person standing in that kitchen. They had held a meeting about my marriage. They had chosen the words they would use. They had decided I would forgive, that I would stay. That family would take precedence over what had been done to me. They had built a whole structure around my future, without once asking me what I wanted to do with it. I stepped back from my mother's hand. I need some air, I said. Outside, my sister was sitting on the back step. She had been listening from the hallway. She looked up at me and started to say my name. I walked past her. I found Meredith in the dining room and told her I was leaving, and she should get a ride back with my parents. She asked if we could talk when I got home. I said sure. That word had stopped meaning anything. I drove back to Calgary and called the one person I needed. I had a friend from university who had gone into family law. We'd been close the first few years after school, drifted the way people do, stayed in loose touch. He'd made partner at a firm in Calgary 2 years earlier. I called him from the hotel parking lot, and he answered on the third ring. He met me at his office the next morning, a Sunday, and I laid everything across his desk. The screenshots, the bank records, the pregnancy test, the documentation I'd assembled over 2 weeks, the story of the kitchen the night before. He read through it methodically. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, and was quiet for a moment. What do you want out of this? He said. To leave, I said, clean. No shared city, no negotiation, no running into anyone at a superstore. I want to be gone. He became a lawyer then. Not a friend, my lawyer. The house was in my name only. Purchased the year before Meredith and I met. Never transferred to joint title. Under Alberta's Matrimonial Property Act, she had a legal claim to the equity, but given the documentation and the circumstances, he said her realistic leverage was constrained. He recommended listing it quickly and negotiating from a position of strength. The joint account at RBC held $97,000. I was a joint holder. I moved it that afternoon to a new TD account at a branch across the city. On Monday, I removed her from my insurance policies. Her car, financed in my name, payments I had been making for 2 years, was about to stop being something I managed. On Tuesday, I texted her project extended. Won't be home for a month, miss you. She replied in under a minute, a heart. I listed the house Thursday, cash offer Saturday, 30-day close. Divorce papers were filed Monday morning. A process server went to the children's hospital and handed my wife the documents in the lobby. In front of the reception desk she'd worked behind for 6 years. My phone started ringing at 8:47 in the morning. I let it ring. I had already arranged the transfer through my company. They had a major hydroelectric expansion project running in northern Quebec, part of the La Grande complex. New generating capacity being added to one of the largest hydro systems in the world. Remote camp, long rotations, satellite uplink that worked when the weather cooperated. My supervisor said he'd been looking for someone with enough experience and enough steadiness to run the structural inspection phase. When can you start? He asked. 3 weeks, I said. I packed one bag. Everything else, the furniture, the photographs, the wedding album on the shelf, the framed print she'd picked out for the living room, the life we had built and apparently shared with other people, stayed. I left a note on the kitchen counter. 8 words: house closes in 26 days. Be out. No signature, no explanation. Just a fact, the way I would note a deadline on a project schedule. At 2 in the morning on a Wednesday, I loaded my truck. I stood in the doorway of that house for about 30 seconds and looked at what I was leaving behind. The front entry I had retiled. The backyard where Angus had helped me pour the concrete pad, and I had bought him lunch after, and genuinely felt, like he was as close as a brother. Then I got in the truck and drove east. Northern Quebec. In late November is cold, in a way that has nothing to do with the temperature on the thermometer. It's the kind of cold that gets into the permanence of things. Into the rock and the frozen ground and the tears off the reservoir at 6 in the morning when you're starting the first shift. The work camp held 22 people, rotating crews, shared meals, long quiet evenings. Nobody asked personal questions. That was the understood agreement of remote work. Everyone was either running from something or building towards something, and neither direction required explanation. 3 months later, my lawyer called. DNA results, he said. And Angus, 99.8%. I was standing outside in -23. I felt something loosen in my chest, not happiness. Relief. The kind that comes from a locked door. Knowing what's on the other side of it can't get through. The divorce finalized the following spring. Meredith received what she was legally entitled to, which was meaningfully less than the life she had been counting on keeping. Angus lost his training clients within months. A personal trainer's business runs on trust and referrals. And there is nothing more efficient at destroying both than the specific combination of facts he has assembled for himself. From what reached me secondhand, he lost the gym lease by the following fall. About 8 months into the Quebec project, I met Renata. She was a wildlife biologist, part of a habitat assessment team working near the reservoir expansion zone. We were at the same camp for a week while her crew collected data, and our construction shell paused for weather. She had dark hair cut short, quiet eyes, and the manner of someone who had spent years in environments where you said what you meant or you said nothing. We ate at the same table 3 nights in a row. Because the camp had 1 table and 6 chairs, by the 3rd evening, we were still talking when the generator curfew cut the lights. She did not fix me. I want to be clear about that. I was not a broken thing waiting to be repaired. But she was honest in a way I had forgotten people could be, quietly and without performance, and she never pushed on doors I kept closed. That was enough. After a while, it was more than enough. The old phone sat in a box in my camp locker for nearly a year. I turned it on once, long enough to see the count of messages. I didn't read them. I already knew their shape, anger first, then pleading, then the appeals to family and history, and what we owed each other. I turned it off and put it away. My lawyer forwarded things to me periodically. My father had had a cardiac episode. Not a full heart attack, but significant enough to put him in hospital for a week. My mother had started seeing a counselor. Angus was working somewhere in retail. From what he'd heard, Meredith had the baby, a boy, and was managing on 1 income. There was a photograph sent to the old phone number. I didn't open it. Then a letter arrived at my Quebec address. I don't know how my father found it. He had worked for CN Rail for 30 years and knew how institutional information moved. Maybe he called my company's HR office. Maybe he asked someone who knew someone. He had always been methodical when he wanted something done. I read the letter standing on the porch of my place, outside Baie-Comeau on a cold April morning. His handwriting was uneven. His hands had never fully steadied after the cardiac episode. He wrote that he had failed me. Not in the general self-absolving way people say that. He was specific. He said that when my mother first told him what was happening between Meredith and Angus, his first reaction had been to think about how to keep the family together, and that he had let that instinct override everything he knew was right. He wrote that he had understood in that moment. He was choosing between loyalty to me and comfort for everyone else, and that he had made the wrong choice. He said he was not asking for forgiveness. He said he just needed me to know that I had been right about everything, that leaving had been the right thing, that he was sorry. He signed it the way he had always signed birthday cards when I was growing up. Love, Dad. My hand was unsteady when I folded it. Renata came outside after a few minutes. She sat beside me without asking what was in the letter. I told her my father had written to me. She didn't ask to read it. She didn't tell me what I should do. She just sat in the cold with me until I was ready to go back inside. For 2 days I carried the question with me. Whether to call, whether to go back even once. Whether a dying man's honesty entitled him to something I had decided I was done giving. I thought about what going back would actually look like. Sitting in my parents' house, my sister in the room, the whole constellation of people who had known and said nothing, arranged around a kitchen table, expecting me to make them feel better about it. I thought about what they had chosen when they were tested. On the 3rd night, I took the letter out and read it again. Then I folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't go. 6 months later, my lawyer called to tell me my father had died at home peacefully. There was a service on Saturday. I said I wouldn't be there. He said he'd make a note. That Saturday, Renata and I drove 2 hours out to a lake we'd been meaning to visit since the previous summer. We borrowed a canoe from someone at camp. We paddled out to the middle and sat there in the October quiet, the Quebec trees gone orange and red all the way down to the water's edge. Somewhere to the southwest, a long way from where I was, my father was being buried. I thought about him once clearly, and then I looked at the water. We paddled back in the late afternoon, made dinner. It was a good day. My mother sent one last message through my lawyer. She wrote that she had stood at the grave and understood she had lost 2 people. She said she was going to stop reaching out. She said she hoped I was somewhere that felt like home. And that she was proud of me. And she knew she had no right to say that. But she was saying it anyway. I read it once, Then I closed the file. I was 37. Senior structural engineer on a project that would put clean power into 250,000 homes. I had a house I had chosen myself in a town I had come to know slowly, and on my own terms. I had a partner who had never once made me wonder if she was telling me the truth. I had a life that fit me in a way. The old one never quite had. Though, I hadn't understood that about the old one until it was gone. People get this part wrong when they hear a story like mine. They assume the absence is violence, that disappearing is an act of aggression sustained over years, a punishment designed to inflict maximum damage. It isn't. Anger is maintenance work. It wakes up every morning needing to be fed, needing to know what today's version of the wound looks like. I didn't feed it. I never had any interest in that. What I did was simpler. I assessed the situation the way I assess a structure. Looked at what was load-bearing and what was compromised, what could be reinforced and what needed to come down. The foundation had failed. You don't rebuild on a failed foundation. You clear the site and you start somewhere that can hold what you're building. My family wanted forgiveness to be the thing that made the story make sense. The detail that resolved everything, that let my mother say, "We went through something and came back from it." My sister wanted to be forgiven without explanation. My father, at the end, at least wanted me to know he understood what he'd chosen. That letter was the most honest thing I ever received from any of them. But honesty after the fact is not the same as having been honest before. And the fact that they finally understood what they had taken from me did not give them what they wanted from me in return. The silence was not their punishment. It was my answer. If it landed on them as something heavy and permanent, that only meant they understood what it represented. Not a man who was still angry, but a man who was no longer available. There is a difference between being ignored out of spite and being absent by design. They spent a long time learning the difference. I build structures that are meant to last. That part never changed. I just got more careful about what I build them on.